welcome. My name is Kalika. I'm a motion designer and animator, and I'm here to teach you how to animate a photo collage that I created in Photoshop a couple of weeks ago. Now, if you're interested in doing this type of animation and you're pretty good with Photoshop, great. But if you just kind of need a refresher or you want to see how I made this, you can look in my channel. I'll also link it in the description for how this particular photo collage was created. So we have a few things that we need to go over. We're going to start off with an overview of how to prepare this file for animation. Then we're going to go into After Effects. We're going to talk about the different ways of importing a layered file. Then we're going to do just some really basic timing, like, okay, what's supposed to happen first, second, and third here? After that, we're actually going to start doing some movement on these different layers. We'll add a couple of effects and we'll make a nice little loop. Okay, now, truth be told, this is a redo of a live stream that I did a couple of weeks ago. It was kind of glitchy. My internet connection wasn't great. I was using a crappy laptop. Sorry, crappy laptop. So it hopefully will go much smoother this time. All right, so without further ado, in the description for this YouTube video, there are some work files. Now, let me know if you're having any trouble accessing those work files, but inside the work files, here's what we have in there. Let me show you, give you a little rundown. So you'll just download that whole zip file from Google Drive here. So it's called AENMPS Collage, and there's a folder called KalikaFX Collage, and you're going to download that entire folder because it has all, is that, oh crap, it's not the final one. Sorry, I zipped it and then I didn't put it on there. Let me just trash this and I'll put the new thing on there, okay? Sorry, friends. Just a second. There it is. Yes, that's the most recent. Okay. So in this folder, let me show you what's in there. It should be up in just a couple of seconds. In this folder, we have a folder of assets, and inside the assets folder, you will find a file called Photocollage work. Yes, indeed, it is there. You can download it pretty easily. It's kind of a large file, and that's just because I haven't like compressed anything. I haven't flattened any layers. I haven't made anything really animation friendly. It's still the way that I designed it. And I did this on purpose because a lot of times we'll design something so that we have maximum flexibility in terms of design and lockup, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy to animate. So I usually make two versions of a file. I'll have the one that's fully designed and editable, and then I'll have a second version that's for the animation. And this way, if I need to go back to the original and make changes, I can, and I have, meanwhile, this really easy to work with file. Okay, so we have in here assets, After Effects projects, exports, and our finished MP4. Let me show you what we're gonna make. Oh, hi, Carol. So here's our finished MP4. There's no sound. So there's a few things happening here. We have some fades, we have some things moving in, we have this sticker peel that's happening. But if you look a little bit deeper, you'll see that these fades aren't just ordinary fades. They're what I call blur fades. So that means that there's a blur with the fade that's happening, and that gives it like this added sort of creepy dimension, I feel like. So this should be pretty fun. All right, so here is my Photoshop file, and it looks a little bit different than what we had in the other version. So I'm just gonna tweak it a little bit real quick. So the work files are located in the description. Just download that zip file that's within that folder, okay? So inside of here, I have this layer called Lady. And the Lady layer, I have a levels and a hue saturation. And I think I just need to bump the levels a little bit. So I'm gonna double click the levels in here. And if you're having trouble locating that, just next to the layer name, there's this little drop down. And the reason why I have a drop down is because this, friends, is a smart object, which means that if I double clicked on this, it's going to open the original file. I have not actually done anything to the original file. It is embedded in this file as a layer that I can make changes to and then change those changes, and nothing is going to degrade the image. So this is what's known as non-destructive photo editing. So I'm going to double click my levels here, and I'm just going to increase the range of black to gray here because it doesn't feel like it got dark enough. Yeah, so I think that that gives us a little bit of better contrast. Yeah, happy. Okay, so I need a couple of things to happen here. So I have my fence, fine. I have my sticker, fine. And I'm gonna prep this guy for animation. Let me save this first. And I always do a save as, okay? So I have the save first, then I'm gonna do file, save as. And when I save as, what I do is in my KalikaFX collage assets folder, I'm gonna call this Photocollage anim. And that's my code so that I know that, hey, this is like ready to animate, okay? And I save it as the new file name before I start working on it because I don't want to screw it up, right? Okay, so my fence has a drop shadow to it. And the drop shadow is kind of subtle. So I can always double click on it and make adjustments to it as necessary. Now, when you have a drop shadow in Photoshop, the angle that it's referring to is actually the angle of the light. So if you have your angle set to the right, you're going to see the shadow project out to the left. Okay, so you can adjust your distance, spread, and size there. This is something that I might not want to keep in my Photoshop file. So what I like to do is just, I leave it as an added effect. This is what's known as a layer style type of effect, and so what I can do is I can always turn it on and off once I get into After Effects. Same thing with the sticker. The sticker has a drop shadow as well. Then I have this layer here, and this circle I had used as a way of isolating out the hole on this image. So this image originally, if I just alt click the eyeball, it had some other lady's painting in there, and I didn't want that. So I'm just going to undo a couple times so I can get back to here. So I actually want to keep this layer, and this layer up here, I'm going to rename it as Circle Matte. And I might use this a couple of times. So I'm just gonna leave that as is. And I'm leaving it as white on transparent, okay? I don't have to have the visibility turned on. You can always turn on and off your visibilities in After Effects after the fact, okay? So as I go through these layers, I'm just gonna collapse them up so that we don't get confused with all the stuff in them. And I'm gonna turn off their visibilities so we can see what we're doing. Now this layer that has the hole, it also, yeah, it has a levels to it. I don't anticipate needing to change this at all. And what I might do just to kind of shrink down my file size is just merge it to another layer. So I'm gonna take a, whoops, not a group, click this little icon down at the very bottom here for, hello, new layer. There we go. There we go, new layer. See that guy? Oh, where did you go? You are so big. There it is. That's the new layer icon. And I'm just going to make this not be 400% because that's insane. That's so big. Yeah, so that's my new layer icon. And when I have a new layer, I can just click the new layer, click the smart object that has the layer mask, that has the levels effect and so on, and just do Command or Control E for merge. And notice this actually screwed up my blending. So that's not good. So when I click on this, you need to be mindful that this is color burn. That's the blending mode that it's set to. So if I click this and shift click the empty layer and do Command or Control E, I need to then reset my blending to color burn. And then it looks the same as it did before. Okay, so I'm gonna call this hole. Then I have this layer here, which is my door, okay? And the door, I'm going to do something a little different than I did last time. I'm actually gonna duplicate the layer, okay? And then I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna straighten it out. And the reason why is because it can be a little tricky to get these things to like move in a straight line sometimes. And I'm gonna show you guys kind of a trick to get that to move properly. So I'm gonna do Command or Control T and just rotate this so it's straight. Oh, come on, there, now it's straight. Okay, and because it's a smart object, it's like, oh yeah, it was straight in the original. I will return it to straight right here. So if you look up here in the options box, it tells me, my zoom sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. So right here, it tells me that this has been reset to a 0%, like a 0 degree rotation. And then I can just click off of it, and then I'm going to merge door copy, and I'm going to merge door. Okay, so I make a new layer for each of those. Door copy, I'm going to rename simply door. And noticing the opacity was set to 70%. So what I got to do is on both of these layers, change their opacity to 100%. Just remember in your head, 70. Then this one, Command or Control E. This one, Command or Control E, and then reset their opacities. And the reason why is because otherwise I'll end up with something that claims to be 100% opacity, but I can see through it, and that can be a little bit confusing. This one that's in the place where it's supposed to be for the lockup, I'm going to rename that door-FPO, which means for placement only, and this one's going to be just door-anim, so I know that that's the one I'm going to animate. Okay, so I'm just going to turn on the layers that belong to the lockup now. Okay, and turn off the circle map. So then we have this interesting situation where we have this shadow, and then we also have our lady, okay? And the lady has this mat, but the mat is the same. If I Command or Control click on the layer mask, I mean, not layer mat, layer mask, I can see that, oh, it's been selected here, and it's actually the same as this circle mat. So what I'm gonna do, once again, paying attention to my opacity and my blending, I'm going to duplicate the lady layer. On lady copy, I'm actually going to remove the layer mask. This is intentional because I want the lady to move within the circle. And if she's already masked out from Photoshop, she's going to move, like the circle's going to move with her. And I don't want that. I want the circle to stay put. See my hands? And I want her to like be able to go in and out of the circle. Okay, so what I got to do is discard this layer mask. And then, let me just deselect here. I can merge lady copy to a new layer, Command or Control E. I'm going to call this lady_anim. I'm going to duplicate my circle map so that way I have that a second time to use above lady anim. I don't need to call it copy because it's exactly the same thing. And then this one here is going to just be called lady dash, you guessed it, FPO for placement only. This one I also want to merge it down because it's a big file and I want After Effects to run a little bit more smoothly. So I made an empty layer using the little new layer icon. Click and shift click, Command or Control E. Okay, and now I have my lady FPO. Then I have my beach layer. The beach layer is set to an opacity of 30. So I'm going to change the opacity back to 100. I'm going to make a new layer and combine these, Command or Control E. I find that to be easier than the alternative, which is to commit the smart object to being a real layer, and then I'm going to change that opacity back to 30. Okay, then I have my paint layer. My paint layer is at 100% and normal blending. I'm going to merge that. And I think if you have your original layer on top of your empty layer and you Command E, you won't have to rename it. So I'm just going to go through and make sure that everything's been renamed. My background is just plain white, and that's a good thing. And this all looks fine. And I am going to leave those drop shadows the way that they are because I don't want to screw them up. It gets a little bit tricky, to be honest, because this layer has the color burn, and then we have the shadow as a separate layer. If I tried to merge these two, it might look kind of weird. Let's just see what happens, okay? And if you have questions, of course, please just go ahead and ask. So I'm going to do Command or Control E, and then if I do color burn, that actually looks okay. Let me just undo a couple times. Yeah. That looked all right. I don't hate it. I don't like that I don't have flexibility over it though. That's gonna make me a little bit crazy. But I suppose if the client comes back and they're like, oh, you need to reduce the opacity of that thing, I can be like, all right, let's go back to the original and do it there. All right, so any questions so far on what I've done? Okay. All right, so this all seems well and good. I'm pretty excited about this, and these guys are at 70%. My mats are ready. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save this file, and I'm gonna drop this file into our Google Drive. So that way when you are ready to animate, you don't have to do all the Photoshop steps. You can just be like, yeah, I'm ready to go. So here we go. Inside my assets is this Photocollage anim, and I'm just gonna drop that in. Whoosh. That'll be there in a jiffy. And it's gonna be significantly smaller, I hope. Yeah, see, like originally it was like 300 something megs. This is down to 84. That's significant. That's like a quarter of the size. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so any questions on the Photoshop steps? Feel free to type them into the chat and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, so moving on. In this part, I'm gonna go over the different ways that we can import our layered file, okay? So I can't stand this welcome window. It makes me crazy. Let me just close it up. And if your computer is giving you a similar error to what I got, where it was like, your disk cache is taking up blah, blah, blah space, and that's terrible, and you can't use After Effects, it's a lie. Just go to the Edit menu, go to Purge, and choose All Memory and Disk Cache. And that's just gonna clear out whatever, like, system files After Effects is using. It's really pretty great. You don't see those system files, but they take up a bunch of space. So here, I'm gonna go and do the same thing in Photoshop. I'm gonna go to the Edit menu, Purge, All, and that can sometimes clear out some space as well. Okay, so 5 ways to import a layered file. First of all, you can import it with all its layers merged. Okay, so let's just make a new composition, and we'll make this new composition at the settings that we want for our next import, which I totally don't remember what that was. So let me just check here. Our finished MP4, if I just drag it in, it'll tell me what frame rate I had done that at, which was 24 frames per second. Ta-da! I'll just leave it there. So new composition, and we're gonna do it at 24 frames per second. When you're doing stuff for Instagram, for Facebook, for YouTube, 24 or 30 frames per second is pretty typical. You can actually go as far down as 8 frames per second, but if you go lower than 8 frames per second, it starts to look just like a series of images instead of like a animation, and that's not the point, right? Okay, so I'm just doing 24 frames, and this says that it's 7:08. I'll just type into here, I want this to be 8 seconds long. So if you do 8:00, it'll give you 8 seconds and 0 frames. Okay? Fabulous. And I'm just gonna leave this as comp 1 so that I can demonstrate the 5 ways that we can import things. And if you're familiar with the 5 ways to import, you can, just take a little break. So here we go. First of all, we're gonna import as a merged file. And the merged file, if I just go, this is one thing that I miss about my Mac, My Mac is always like, it knows. It just knows. Here's KFX toots. This. Fabulous. Okay, I should make a shortcut. Shortcut. Yay. Okay, so here is my asset, right? Photocollage anim. At the bottom, it says import as. Now, if you're working on a Mac, there's this really silly button that says options. I want you to click that button so that you can see all the options below, because otherwise you're going to be without options. Who wants no options? That's not good. So we're going to choose import as footage. Okay, and you're like, what kind of footage? Well, we're going to find out. So I hit import, and then it gives me this window where it's like, hey, what kind of footage do you want to be working with? Okay, and I'm going to say import as footage, merged layers. Now this is as if you have merged all your layers into a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF file. And this can be really useful. Like if you're working on a logo animation and you're like, I don't remember if I accidentally moved that one piece of the logo, you can import it as a merged file and then reduce the opacity and double check your work that way. So we can just take a look by dragging this into our composition timeline. And look, it's totally merged, which limits your animation possibilities. Am I right? You can like fade it on, you can slide it across, but you can't have things come on one at a time. Kind of a drag. Okay, so that's the first way you can import things. The second way that you can import things is one layer at a time. So with one layer at a time, and notice I just did a little trick there. I double clicked in the project window and that allowed me to import again. Double click in any blank area of the project window. I'm going to choose this, import as footage once more, and I'm going to say import. Okay, this time, once again, footage, but instead of merged layers, I'm going to choose a layer. Now I'm going to choose the fence layer, and I can merge layer styles into footage or ignore them. And I'm going to merge them, and you can choose between these two options. You can choose to import as document size or layer size. And let's actually do the sticker. It'll be a lot more obvious with the sticker. So if I import as layer size, okay, and the sticker is this thing here that says love songs, right? If I import as layer size, look, this layer is cropped to the dimensions of what's inside. So if I dragged this into the new composition, it just plops it right in the center. It'll always plop it right in the center because, well, that's the default when you drag things into the comp. If you dragged it like this, it would drag it wherever you let go your mouse, but I like to drag into the timeline. So, all right, that's fine. This is a way of animating things that isn't super precise because then you can, you know, kind of line things up like this and then you can animate layer by layer and it's fine. It's easy to animate, but it's not exactly pixel perfect to whatever you designed in Photoshop. Now, it happens sometimes that you are creating something in Photoshop and you realize, well, you're done creating something in Photoshop. You go to After Effects, you're animating it, and then you realize like, hey, I forgot a layer. So with love songs, for example, what if I actually wanted there to be like a little halo around the word love? So I would make a brand new layer, and let's just sample with the eyedropper tool this color. And I'm just doing a little what if, right? So I'm just gonna shrink my little mouse thing and choose from my, where did all my brushes go? This is weird. Okay, I'll choose that brush. And we're just gonna pretend that I wanted like a little halo, right? So I'm just gonna call this halo. Save. So if I were working in After Effects, and let's pretend this is all layered, like, oh, look, it updated, right? So if I just wanted that one layer, that one halo layer, if I just went into Photocollage anim, import as footage, and choose layer halo, see, it's so small. So then I would have to place it by hand. But check this out. If I wanted it to line up perfectly with what I had already designed, I could import it using what's called document size settings. So if I double click in here and I go over to Photocollage Anim and I go to import and I choose import kind footage, choose layer halo, footage dimensions, document size. If I drag this in on top, look at that. It's like exactly where it needs to be. So when I turn on my original, there's no difference. So this is the method that I use when I'm like, oh, I really should have created that other layer. I'll import that one layer using the document size settings, and that makes all the difference. Is it more difficult to animate? A little bit, but my solution to that is I'll move the anchor point to like where I want it to pivot or scale from, and then I'll make a little mask around it using my mask tool. And then I'll go to the layer menu, I'll go to mask, and I'll choose hide locked masks. And then I just go over here and lock it. And you see the layer handles, now they're cropped to the actual contents of the layer. And that just makes it, it's like the best of both worlds. Okay, so I was able to import just that one layer with like fidelity to my original design, but it also allows me to animate it easily because it's masked and it has the little pivot where I want it to be. Okay? All right, so that was the third way to import, right? So our ways to import so far, we had import as merged, we had import as footage layer size, then we had import as footage document size. And you'll notice when you do the footage document size option, it imports it at the same exact dimensions as your document. So you end up with like a giant pane of glass, the same dimensions as your document, and then your layer is like wherever the layer is supposed to be, like your artwork just appears in that one little sphere, or that, not sphere, that one little area, okay? All right, so now we've gone over those two. Then you can import as a composition using either layer size or document size as well. Now the advantage of importing, I'm just going to delete all this stuff because we don't need it. The advantage of importing a layered file with the layer size option is that it's much easier to animate. But it also assumes that you're not going to go back into Photoshop and make changes that'll affect the dimensions of your layers. So for example, if I import as this anim version, right? If I do retain layer sizes, okay? And this one I'm gonna do editable layer styles. I'm gonna call this Photocollage anim, and we'll just call this layer size. And then I'll do it again, but this time I'm gonna do it document size. So this one, import as composition. So when it says retain layer sizes, that means each of the layers is cropped, and if it just says composition, that means each of the layers is the dimensions of your doc. Okay, so there's that. All right, so we're looking at this, we're looking at this, right? Now suppose I took my, and this is just me messing around again. If I took my halo and I was like, actually, I want the halo to be on top of the whole like phrase, love songs, and then I save it and I go back to After Effects. If I'm in the layer size option, I won't see any change, and that's because, well, the layer size option, if the layer size didn't change, it's not going to shift the layer anywhere. If the layer size does change, then it'll shift it. But if I go to this version, which is the composition document size option, it shifted it over. So yes, again, a little bit more clunky to animate because look at the dimensions of this layer, but that does make it easier in terms of the editability of the whole thing. Okay? All right, fabulous. So we're gonna work with the layer size option. So I'm just gonna start fresh, and we're going to import it exactly the way we want it this time. double click in the empty project window, and this is assuming that I've made an empty comp. So if you haven't made an empty comp, make one, set it to 8 seconds duration and 24 frames per second, and then you can delete it because you don't actually need it anymore. And then double click in the project window, and we're going to navigate over to Photocollage-anim. Now remember, I did put that very Photoshop file into Google Drive. So if you haven't downloaded it and you want to, now's a good time to do it. Import as composition retain layer sizes, and I'm going to hit import. Okay, okay, and then I have to double click this composition icon. Don't drag and drop because that just like puts one, it's like putting an envelope in an envelope. Do you ever get junk mail like that where you're just like, really guys, you had to put like one envelope in another one? No, you don't want to do that. Just double click the little film strip guy and it'll bring up all of your layers. Okay, so we're just going to do a little bit of prep work. We don't need the halo layer, so I'm just going to delete that. You probably don't have that in yours. Oh, rats. Where's my, let's see, here's my sticker, layer styles. Okay, so you see how on the sticker there's this drop shadow? We can like remove the drop shadow if we don't like it, which is kind of nice. Okay, so that's why I imported it using composition, layer, retain layer sizes, and keep the layer styles editable. Okay, we have our circle matte. The circle matte is also above the Lady Anim. So I'm actually going to turn off Lady FPO, turn on Lady Anim, and then down here at the bottom of the interface, there's this button that says toggle switches and modes. So I got to click on that, and I'm going to bring up my track matte column. Is this all making sense so far? If you have any questions, just drop them into the chat. Lady Anim, I'm going to change the none area to alpha matte. Okay, and this way the lady is flexible. I can move her around within this hole. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing. I don't know if I have to do the same thing anywhere else. We'll leave it as is. Oh, I have to do the same thing with the door Anim and the door FPO. So you see how this door is like kind of set up like that? I got to do something interesting. Let me see if I can remember how to do it. We wanted to tilt it like that, and then now we want it to be like this. So I think I remember. Let's see if I remember. I'm going to make a null object, and I'm going to place the null object like kind of in the middle of this door. Okay, and I want the null object to be like, I want the door to be parented to the null object. Okay, so if you're not seeing your parent column, you want to right click up here, go columns, parent, and link, and you want to parent the door to the null object. Now for best results, you want to collapse all of your layers, and parenting, remember, the child always reaches out to the parent, and the child goes like this, and I'm going to select both these guys and change their label color to yellow. This way I know they belong together. I'm going to take the null object and I'm going to rotate it a little bit. I'm going to rotate it like this, and then let me hit position. That's going to go sideways. How did I do this last time? There was a method that I used. I don't remember what it was. All right, so I'm just going to do it easier. I'm going to delete the null object and the door anim, and we're just going to animate door FPO because really there's no difference. And if I zoom out, there's door FPO. That's going to be fine. We'll just leave it as is, and it's going to be kind of easy to animate because we'll just like make sure that the line of movement coincides with the line of like this grain of the wood. Okay? All right. So then we got to kind of figure out our pacing for the whole thing. And if I double click on the finished movie, it looks like we have paint, then we have the hole, And then we have the fence, the wood, the sea, the lady, and the sticky. Okay? So I'm going to write that down. And if you ever see something on Instagram where you're like, oh my gosh, I totally want to make that thing. Like, it helps to just like bust out the Post-its and make a little list of what you're trying to make here. So, all right, stop playing. Stop playing. Okay, so first we started off with the paint. Then from the paint, we went to our hole, then our fence and our wood. The beach, the lady slid in, and then our sticker. The sticker's my favorite part. I know Reiko loves the sticker too. And then the sticker, and then we did a fade to white. Okay, so there's my very elaborate list, and I just realized how short I must look on the camera. Whoa. Okay, here we go. All right, that's better. I'm usually standing when I do these, and this time I'm sitting. Okay, so just a sec, friends. Just a second. Okay, there, happy. Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of timing, and the way we're gonna do the timing is with the in column, okay? That's how I do my rough timing. And I find that it's a little bit easier to be working in frames rather than time code. So if I control or command click, so control on PC, command on Mac, on the time code, it will take me to frames instead of time code. How are we doing so far? Is everything kind of making sense? Any like new information that you were like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I never thought to do it that way. Like, feel free to type it into the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna start with my paint coming on, and I'm going to just highlight all the layers that I need to actually work with, and I'm gonna change them all to be yellow. I'm gonna turn off their visibilities so that I can really just like very deliberately type in my values and get them going on. So my paint layer is going to come in at maybe like 30 or 36 frames. Okay, so it's going to start pretty slow. The paint layer is going to come on. Then after the paint layer comes on, like maybe so 30, and then maybe like at 55 frames, I'm going to have let's see, my hole come on after that. So here's the hole layer. Okay, and that's going to come in at that point. So I can either click and type, or I can use the bracket key. And by bracket key, I mean, and let me just make a new thing in Photoshop so you can see what I'm talking about. The bracket key is this guy. Okay, this is located just to the right of letter P. That square bracket key will allow your layer to start at the frame where your playhead is. Oh, thanks, Carol, for the update. Okay, so there's that layer. So now it goes white, paint, and then this guy. And I think that the pace can kind of pick up after that. So after the hole shows up, then we're going to have our fence show up. So maybe around 70 frames, we'll have the fence show up. So I select the fence layer and I hit the left square bracket. Then I'm gonna have the wood show up, and maybe the wood will show up at 80 frames. So just kind of keeping it to round numbers, like 10 frames, 15 frames, and so on. And I'm gonna have the wood show up at that point. So the wood, or rather the door. So select that door layer and left square bracket there. Then the beach is going to come on. And the beach is going to come on like maybe around here. So here's the beach. And then I want the lady to come on slightly later. So maybe at like 1:15, I'll have the lady anim come on, turning on the visibility, left square bracketing that guy. And finally, we have our sticker and then our fade. So here's the sticker. I'm gonna have the sticker come on at maybe about 140. And then we'll have the fade. Fade's just gonna be at the very end. So this goes to 191 frames. So maybe like around 180, I'll put the fade, okay? So for the fade, I'm gonna do layer, new, solid, and I'm gonna change that color to white, hit okay, and hit okay. Now, the way that I have my layers set up is I have in my preferences general, I have the create new layers at composition start time turned off. And because that's turned off, if I create a new solid at, let's say, 180 frames, it's going to show up at 180 frames. If I have this turned on and I create a new solid at 180 frames, it's actually going to start at 0. Okay, so I like using this off because it makes the layers show up at whatever point in time I'm actually at. I call this animating like an editor. So if we play this back, it's going to be super choppy, but at least it'll give us a good sense of the overall timing. Okay, so I have all this stuff there, right? I think what I need to do is just take all my yellow layers, and what you can do, I just learned this recently, ready for this? Go to the search area, type in yellow, and it'll just show you your yellow layers. I know, wild, right? And then if I just X out of that, see, none of the other stuff is selected. Amazing, I love that one. So then we're just gonna move everything like about 10 or 15 frames earlier. And the reason why is because I kind of set it up for when I wanted the layer to resolve rather than the point where I wanted the layer to start its entrance. So if this was at 70, I think I actually want it to be at 55, just to give it a little bit of time to get into frame. Okay, and now we'll play it back again. All right, so now we're gonna add some fades to this. Fades and blurs and all kinds of good stuff. So for the paint layer, I'm gonna have this fade on starting from here. So it's at 15 frames. I know, the search and color layer. I love this thing, it's so cool. So if I do T for opacity for the paint, I can turn on the stopwatch next to opacity. And what I like to do, just because some of my layers are at lower opacities, I'll turn on the opacity stopwatch first, and then I'll Option Shift right arrow, and it actually shoves it over by 10 frames. And then I can do Option right arrow a couple more times, 1, 2, and now I can change this first keyframe to 0. This way I don't have to remember the opacity value. So now this kind of fades on over the course of half a second. If I want this to fade on a little bit more slowly, I totally can do that. Just move this first keyframe earlier. Maybe it'll start at 8 frames. And then like just drag this, and look, one hand, and I'm dragging and it's giving me this like double-ended arrow. If I hold shift, it'll snap. Okay, so now I can play this back and it gives me that. So now we want this whole layer to come on, and the whole layer, I want it to come on with a blur and a fade at the same time. And I don't want it to have tons of blur, but I want enough blur so that it does have kind of a softness to it. So the blur that I really like, I like the Gaussian blur. I like the camera lens blur as well, but the camera lens blur takes a long time to export. So we'll just use Gaussian today. I like to turn on the repeat edge pixels. It makes a nice difference, especially when you get to the edge of a layer. I'm going to increase the blurriness amount to 30 and just see how blurry that is. Like, that's like really blurry. I don't know if I like that. And it's weird because it actually, like, yeah, it did blur everything, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm digging that. Because, like, see how this edge is, like, still kind of crispy? I don't think that's good. If I turn off repeat edge pixels, that doesn't make any sort of difference. That's weird, right? Let's turn on the alpha. That's fine. Does our paint have a hole? No, our paint doesn't. That's strange. I think it's because there were 2 layers that made that up. But I think it'll look okay once we have the blur with the fade, okay? So I'm gonna do the blur and then T for opacity. So I turn on the opacity stopwatch and I turn on the blurriness stopwatch. And then if I hit letter U, you can see both of these keyframes show up in the timeline. Then I can move them later. And I'm actually gonna move them like, let's move them to like around here. So like about 55 frames. And I want my blur to actually be present for a few extra frames. So I'm gonna move the blur keyframe so that it's at 50, and I'm gonna start everything. Oh, whoops. The blur should start at 30, and then it should resolve later than the fade. Okay, this is me figuring things out as I go. So the blur starts at 30. The opacity starts at 0. Okay, then the blur resolves here, but the fade maybe resolves a few frames earlier. There we go. So let's see how that looks. So just this much. Paint. And then that comes on. And I think that looks pretty good. Notice that it's kind of low resolution. If I go to my preview window and I change my resolution, and it's like down at the bottom. So make sure that you make your preview window nice and wide. I'm going to change that to full. And now when I play this back, it should look pretty nice. So that's fading on. And then we have this guy right here. There we go. There we go. Nice. So like it continues to resolve as it fades, which is quite nice. For the fence, I think that might look nice if the fence actually moved into frame as it faded on. And one thing I always used to do, I always used to have things like they would always come in from off screen, but this time I actually wanted to fade and blur and scale down. I think that'll look really pretty. Because if I zoom back, see how big this fence layer is? So I think it's gonna be okay if I make it like kind of big and blurry and fadey. So if I do S, Shift T, okay, and Shift P, now I have position, scale, and opacity, all right? And I'm gonna set where I want this to end up, like before I start messing with it. So I'm going to turn on my position, my scale, and my opacity keyframes at this point in time. And fun fact, you can actually change your anchor point after you've set one keyframe on everything. I'm going to set my anchor point right here. Okay, I think that's going to look really good. So then earlier, I'm going to hit letter I to make sure I'm at the end point of that layer. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. I'm going to move it off. So switching tools to the selection tool, I'm going to move it off like that. Not too much. I mean, should I move it like here? Yeah, I could move it like this. That would be okay too. I just want it to sort of match the angle of everything else. And I want to drop the opacity to 0. Okay, but I can't see how much I blurred it. So let's delete that opacity keyframe and let's give us an effects and presets. This time I'm going to try the camera lens blur. Camera lens blur is really beautiful. It simulates what an actual camera's blur is going to look like. And you can choose the iris shape. So if you have this set to hexagon and you increase the blur amount, look at that. It actually looks like when you have your camera not quite sharp. So I kind of like that. I think it looks really cool. I'm going to leave everything else at the defaults. I think that's fine. If you turn on repeat edge pixels, you don't even need to. I think that's okay. I'm going to turn on blur radius of 34 right here. Unlike some of the other blurs that are out there though, camera lens blur always turns on with some amount of blur. It turns on with 5 blur radius. So just be aware of that. So for the opacity, I'm going to start it at 0. And then when we get over here, if I hit letter U, it'll show me my blur radius amount. And I can just do 0 for the blur radius amount and it sharpens up. And I can just move that a little bit later so that we can see it sort of solidify over time. So that, and I probably moved it too much and I probably scaled it too much. So I'm just going to split the difference and just place my playhead in between these 2 columns of keyframes. And if I just turn on the little like add or remove keyframe button there, it'll actually let me just add a keyframe at the current value. So I'm going to do that for both position and scale. So it's not going to be too big and it's not going to be too scaled out, too moved out. And then I'm just going to delete these 2 keyframes. Click and shift click to select them. Click and shift click and just moving them over. Now if I hold shift, it's going to snap to the other keyframes. And I think that's going to look much nicer. And you see how that kind of like continued to resolve. I thought that was pretty good. Okay, so next we got to get the wood in there. And the wood, according to my timing, is supposed to be here like right around like 175 or so. I'm going to have it land. So with this one, I'm only going to animate the position. So P for position, and I'm going to move this back. I'm going to move this up. And just try to align that little notch that's in the wood with the wood, like with the position path. Okay, and that's pretty good. And if you're noticing that things are like kind of weirdly snapping to stuff, just go to your view menu and make sure that you have snap turned off. I just realized I forgot to save. If you've also forgotten to save, now would be an ideal time to do so because that would be bad otherwise. All right, let me go to my shortcut here. AE projects, and this is collage. Okay. And after the live stream, I'll share the After Effects project with you guys too, so that you can kind of compare what you have with what I have. Okay, so that came into place. I think that's nice. And then our beach. And I want the beach to be fairly slow. I'm thinking about the beach, and I think it'll look nice if it shows up fully by 90 frames. So at 90 frames, I'm going to turn on the opacity stopwatch, and then actually like back here at like 50 frames, I'm going to change the opacity down to 0. Now you see how the layer content bar doesn't extend all the way back to 0. I'm going to grab it with my selection tool, hovering over the end, and drag over. If I hold shift, it's just going to snap. Okay, so if I play this back, we're going to have that paint come on nicely. Then we have our circles come on nicely, then that, and then see like throughout that beach is coming on, and it just kind of gives it this overall like flow. So the lady, I feel like she comes in kind of late. I definitely want her to be here at this point in time, don't get me wrong, but I feel like overall she's a little bit late. So let's just take her layer, Lady Anim, and I'm going to take my pan behind tool and I'm just going to move her like so, like move her anchor point. And I like to have, whenever there are people involved, I like to have their anchor point be like here, like right at the lower torso. So that way if I need to make them rotate, I could do something like this and it just feels kind of natural, okay? Just gives you more flexibility. So I want her to end up here at this point in time. I'm going to hit P for position and turn on the position stopwatch. And a couple frame, yeah, like right here also, I'm just going to have her rotate forward slightly and hit R for rotation and turn on the rotation stopwatch. I'm going to hit letter U so I can see those keyframes in action, and I'm just going to move forward a little bit. So like those keyframes were at 100, maybe at 104 or 106. I'm going to change my rotation to 0. Okay, and then I'm going to have this whole move happen over the course of about 10 frames. So maybe at like 90 frames? Sure, 90 frames. I'm going to have the move begin. So I'm going to take that selection tool and I'm going to take the lady and move her back, but I also want her to rotate back a little bit. So she's going to rotate like this and selection tool move her over. Okay, and if I hold the shift key down, that's going to lock her to the horizontal. And I just want, like, at the beginning of her move, I just want like a tiny bit of her hair to be showing. I'm also going to give this a fade. So Shift T will bring up the opacity property, turn on the opacity there, go back a little bit and just drop that opacity to 0. So now she's going to come up like right there and kind of tip back. So I'm going to give these guys an ease in. Ease in means it's going to slow down getting there. And then I'm going to give this one an ease in as well. Okay, so it starts faster and it ends slower. Not sure if I'm going to love that, but we'll see. So let's play it back from the beginning. Spacebar to play back, of course. Oh my gosh, that's so fast. I'm not a fan. Let's take all these keyframes that happened here. Like, if it's too fast, it just looks funny. It's like, oh, that's hilarious. What a hilarious little animation of this very moody collage. So everything else was happening like really slow and somber. And then all of a sudden this woman goes, woohoo! It's like, no, this is at odds. We can't do this. And I think even this rotate back, I'll just move it forward by a couple frames. So Option right arrow, 1, 2, 3, I think should do the trick. So fade them up, and then 1, 2, 3, and there she is. And then we have our love songs little label that comes on. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good. I think that, you know, I'd probably want to put eases on a bunch of this stuff just so that like kind of softens things. So here on this first keyframe pair, I'll do an easy ease. If there's only 2 keyframes, you can put an easy ease and it looks the same as just an ease in. Same thing with the whole, you can do easy ease, or you can just hit F9 on your keyboard. The fence, F9, and with the little door that comes up, that guy needs an ease, but I want the ease to be a little harder. So if I right click and I go to keyframe velocity, I can actually change the incoming velocity because it's like coming into that second keyframe to maybe, I don't know, 70. And you'll see up here, let me just zoom in so you guys can see that. So here's our, like each dot here represents 1 frame. If I right click this keyframe and I go keyframe velocity and I change that to 70 for the first number here on incoming velocity influence, and I hit OK, you'll see that these dots migrate closer to the keyframe, which means that it's going to really slow down as it comes into that place. So if I just set this to fit on my zoom area, we'll be able to see that. Yeah, and that feels really, really nice. For the lady, I feel like there's nothing happening for like a moment. So I'm actually going to extend the start of her and have her fade come on a little earlier. So it's going to like kind of heighten the tension that something's about to happen. And I'm going to move her off. Notice how I'm moving her off though. I placed my playhead like right on top of that position keyframe at the beginning there, because if I did it over here, it'll make a new keyframe. I don't want that. I just want to adjust an existing keyframe. So put your playhead right on top of it, and then you can either move your layer interactively with the selection tool, or you can drag the values using these little position sliders, right? Okay, so now she kind of comes into place, and I'm going to have that sticker come on. So the way the sticker is going to come on is pretty special. I'm going to have the sticker come on with what's called the page peel effect. Now, some people find this to be very cheesy, and in some situations it absolutely looks wrong. But in this situation, I think it's going to look pretty good. Sorry guys, I'm going to have to continue this later on tonight. There's some noise going on downstairs. I need to figure out what's going on. But I'll talk to you guys soon, okay? So sorry I can't finish this at the moment, but I'll post a sequel later on tonight. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you soon, okay? All right, bye.